SEBI board is going to be meeting in Mumbai itself on June 27th and is likely to discuss the concerns over mutual funds exposure to debt, pledged shares as well as promoter guarantees. Now, given the backdrop, SEBI may just crack down on pledged shares and encumbrances as well. Nayantara Rai joins in with that big exclusive detail. Nayantara, we all know as to how there is a lot of talk in the market about mutual funds, their exposure to debt markets and what it's really doing as a sentiment dampener to the retail participant in the market. But what does the regulator have in mind?
So the market regulator, SEBI, finally taking cognizance of the exposure of mutual funds to promoter shares which are pledged, corporate guarantees and various, if I may use the word, innovative means that we have seen being used. For example, non-disposable undertaking. And with what the market regulator is planning is going to be a crackdown not just with respect to the mutual fund industry, but also with banks, the lenders. So basically, in a nutshell, all innovative and creative means being used by lenders, mutual funds and promoters to create encumbrances is going to come down heavily on by the market regulator. It's going to widen the definition to being something as loose, my sources saying, by whatever name it's called. So, not even getting into the details and thinking that, we all know about the Jugaad system in India, right? So covering any future structures that the stakeholders might come up with. My source is telling me SEBI board on June 27th, when it meets in Mumbai, will widen the definition of encumbrances, pretty much to say by whatever name it's called, when it impacts the promoter share titles marketability as well as the freedom to trade those shares. So it's going to be as loosely worded as that, covering any kind of transaction, any kind of a covenant, any kind of a structure. That's part one of this story. It's a big ET Now exclusive, but it just doesn't end there. As you pointed out, retail shareholders' sentiment has been dampened by all of this, and therefore the disclosure norms are going to be bolstered as well. Promoters and others acting in concert will have to declare as soon as 20% of the share capital is encumbered. Once that is done, not only does it disclose that this has happened, reasons have to be explained. You have to give reasons to the stock exchanges and therefore to the retail shareholders as well on why there has been a need to create this encumbrance which has crossed or is at 20% of the share capital. So clearly, SEBI taking note of this, coming soon after a lot of developments have taken place which have hurt the market sentiment. I believe Amit Tandon joining us here. Good afternoon, Amit. This is Nayantara Rai in New Delhi. A big ET Now exclusive. We are understanding from our sources that when the SEBI board meets on June 27th in Mumbai, it's going to widen the definition of encumbrance to say any structure, any covenant, any transaction by whatever name it's called that impacts the marketability and the freedom of the share title of the promoter will be considered as incumbent. If it crosses 20% of the share capital, it has to be mandatorily disclosed by the promoter and those acting in concert. Plus, reasons have to be explained on why this encumbrance has been created. What do you make of this development? What do you make of this proposal that the market regulator and the SEBI board will be discussing on June 27th?
I think what we are seeing at this stage is that SEBI is kind of very sensitive to the developments which have taken place in the market. They've looked at some of the instruments which have caused a great deal of anxiety to the retail investors, be it loans against shares, be it some of the other structures which have kind of meant that payments have been delayed significantly. So what SEBI is doing at this stage is that they're kind of saying that, look, we need a little bit more disclosure on some of these aspects. At one level, they're also kind of bringing in more checks and balances as far as investment, as far as the investors themselves are concerned, in terms of whether they can participate in these instruments or not. And I think this is a part of a wider or a broader development which we've seen over the years, over the last few months. So a few weeks back, SEBI had new guidelines for rating agencies where they kind of tightened and were a little bit more prescriptive about their default studies and what rating means and how data needs to be included. If you go back a bit earlier, you'll find that there was this whole thing where they kind of looked at classification of funds, where they said what is large cap, what is mid cap, and what is small cap. So at this stage, they're kind of saying that, look, there are certain sophisticated or complicated instruments. Just given the legal and regulatory environment and the legal environment and the time taken, some of these could take a lot of time to unwind, and therefore let's kind of start putting some restrictions in terms of who can invest in these and who can't invest in these.
Amit, in fact, because you said it'll take a long time, I should also, I forgot to mention one point. When it comes to this mandatory disclosure on not just crossing 20% of the share capital as being incumbent, and the reasons therefore being given have to be prospective as well as retrospective. Because, my sources telling me this one-time disclosure is needed for all the cases that exist at the moment. So it's going to be retrospective. Amit, the problem also is, and I was talking about this, in India, we talk about the jugaad, which is why perhaps, the market regulator is also doing its own jugaad and saying that anything by whatever name is called has to be considered as incumbent. So that's very loosely defined. Now, the financial journalist, this is a point that I have struggled with. For example, when I was covering the Jet Airways saga and I talked about Naresh Goyal's shares being pledged, I got calls from the airline as well as banks saying, hey, it's not pledged, it's a non-disposal undertaking. It doesn't work as a pledge. So do you really believe that this is possible to roll out? Because it's going to need everyone to accept it and everyone to respect it. And how will SEBI also monitor all of this?
You're absolutely right. Once you have rules and regulations, then people kind of look at what the letter of the law is and say that, look, we're going to stick to the letter of the law. And it's unfortunate that the lawyers, etc., say that, look, this is what is meant. So I think what SEBI is trying to do this time is to not define it very tightly, because once you've started defining it, then it stays at the level you've defined it. But once you've kind of said, look, this is what our intention is, then your ability to kind of interpret the guidelines come down quite significantly. So I think this is how one should look at it for now. Of course, as you point out, meetings on 27th, whether they've got some other color on it, they're going to kind of specify that, look, it's pledge, it includes non-disposal undertaking, it includes some third clause, which is there, one can't say. But, this is an attempt, if I may say, at principles-based regulation rather than rules-based regulation. So let's see how it works out at this stage. But just to add to it, some of the information is already out. People who kind of pledge shares, what the quantum is. What you don't have is what was the reason or the rationale for the pledge. And that adds a little bit more color at this stage. Let's wait and watch and see whether that is going to give the market enough juice to act on, or whether they'll kind of just take it as one more disclosure and disregard it.
Yeah. So, Amit, here's an open invitation to be back here on ET Now exclusively on June 27th after the board meeting of SEBI concludes. There's usually a press conference and a detailed press release. We'd love to have you back then with your views on what has finally been decided.